Perfect. So we've already started, and participants will be able to join. Great. And volume is good. Everyone should be able to share screens. And yeah, I would say we are good to go. Perfect. I'm just going to wait a few moments to see if any more people want to join. I know we've got a small group today, more intimate in size, but the positive is that this will live on Oldways website and will be recorded. And we love to do webinars because whenever we have these conversations, we always share them again and again and reuse them for future celebrations. And we're always going to be celebrating Hispanic Heritage Month and celebration of our Latin American heritage program. So it's just always fruitful that we have these conversations. So once again, thank you, ladies, so much for joining me today, Maria and Karina. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
And feel free to share everything that I've shared with you, the blog post, the articles with your team, with everyone who joins today.
Oh, perfect. Yes, and we did share it on our social media, on our Facebook pages too. So really excited about that. And I'm sharing it with the marketing team also so that they can do it on the Instagram and all of our social media outlets. Well, perfect. Yeah, here we can start around, I'll give it just a couple more minutes, but then might as well get started. Um, and then we can go from there. Well, great. You know what? It's 6:02. Let's get started. Hi there. For those of you joining today, my name is Sarah. I'm the Heritage Diets Curriculum Manager through Oldways Nonprofit. And today we are going to be doing our first webinar series talking about foodways within our Latin American Heritage Program. And I have two guest presenters joining me today. Could y'all unmute and introduce yourselves?
Corina, go ahead.
Well, hello. Thank you so much, Sarah, for having us today. My name's Corina Torralba, and I am from Nacimiento, Coahuila, Mexico. And I will be talking today a little bit about the foods that I grew up with and, some that they still make there. Thank you.
And hi, everybody. My name is Maria Esther Hammock. I am a historian, and I look at the stories of Black liberation in North America, but really focusing on those little-known histories of Black women who left the United States and claimed freedom in Mexico. And today I will be talking about, so I'll be offering a brief overview of that, but also centering on some of the foodways that they would carry down. So
Perfect. Well, yes, this is going to be a really exciting conversation. And for those of you who looked at the registration and said, oh, okay, we'll be talking about Black Seminole foodways and history. We're also going to, just like Professor Maria was talking about, we are going to be making that connection with African Americans and Latin American foodways and how that has been preserved and how we can track that within historic times of that culinary fusion. But before we get started into this deep dive conversation, I'm going to give just a few updates about Oldways Hispanic Heritage Month celebration. And I'll talk a little bit about our Latin American Heritage Program. And so if you have any questions, you could always, we'll save time at the end. Therefore, you can ask as many questions as you want. But I'll just give an overview for a little bit about Oldways so you know who we are. And then we can really start talking about the fun and engaging works of the work that Marie and Corina do. So perfect. I'm just going to share my slide here. Let me make sure I can share my screen. Okay. Great. And then let's do it from here. Perfect. I believe everyone can see the screen. Thumbs up if you can see it. Perfect. Well, great. Once again, my name is Sarah Anderson, and I'm the Heritage Diets Curriculum Manager through Oldways. I focus primarily with the Heritage Diet programs. Therefore, I am over the Latin American Heritage Program and the African Heritage and Health Program. So this is really exciting because, from September 15th to October 15th, it is Hispanic Heritage Month. So of course, we are celebrating the Latin American Heritage and Health Program. And a little bit about myself for those who are interested in just learning about what we do at Oldways and a little bit about me, I guess, before I get started, is I was raised in Houston, Texas. So my upbringing brought me around a lot of Latin influences and foodways. In school, primary school, we grew up speaking Spanish. It was very common. And so when I am talking about the Latin American Heritage Program, it is very near and dear to my heart because it's the program, the foodways, the language, these are things that I've been studying since childhood. And as far as my educational background, I took several learning Spanish language and Latin heritage classes, and also studied abroad in Spain for several months. So this is just a little bit of my upbringing and talking about my passion for the Latin American Heritage Program through Oldways. But what's nice about it is I really feel that Oldways found me. Through our heritage programs, it really is a great opportunity for one to not only get involved in nutrition education for sustainable foodways, but to also, it's very empowering because you're learning about the communities around you and your own heritage. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about Oldways, the heritage diets, and then we can start going into more of the fun stuff. But before the end of this month, I must share some updates about Hispanic Heritage Month and ways that we're celebrating. So we are on Instagram, so at Oldways_a taste of heritage. And if you have your phone, you could always take it out and scan that QR code. Therefore, you can follow us on Instagram. All month long, we've been doing many different engaging activities to connect with community members. So we always have our Hispanic Heritage Month calendar. This is just for the October half, but if you go on our website, you'll also see the September, in which each and every single day on our Instagram and our Facebook and our LinkedIn and our TikToks, we're sharing different recipes and activities and ways that you can celebrate all month long. And we are also have done our advisory board spotlight series. So specifically for our Latin American Heritage Program, we have an advisory board that developed the curriculum. And so one of our spotlight features is Dr. Anya Campos. So if you want to learn more about her, we did a introduction blog post that's available on the website. We also always do our Hispanic Heritage Month blog, talking about ways to celebrate with us, engage. Sometimes we have giveaways on there, cookbook giveaways. So that's what the blog post looks like. It's up on the Oldways website. And then lastly, one of our newest partnerships that we did a webinar with last month, and it's nice because it encompasses both our African and our Latin heritage, is with the Charlie Cart Project. So if you're SNAP Ed or with a library or education facility, you've probably heard of the Charlie carts. We did a bite-sized supplement curriculum in partnership with them, in which those who have access to the Charlie carts now have access to um, a bite-sized version of the Latin American Heritage curriculum and the African Heritage curriculum. And so, what better way to promote this partnership than talk about it in celebration of our Hispanic Heritage Month, because it involves a huge part of our Latin American Heritage program. So these are just some ways to continue the celebration with us throughout the month. And if you have any more questions, there's going to be more. All the information is on Oldways website, but we also have it on our Instagram page, TikTok, and Twitter page too. So those are just getting some of the updates out the way. But now let's talk a little bit more about Oldways. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with Oldways nonprofit, we are a nonprofit dedicated to improving the public health by inspiring individuals and organizations to embrace the healthy and sustainable joys of Oldways eating. So when we're talking about Oldways eating in our heritage diets, not only are they high in taste, nourishment, sustainability, and joy, but we also are talking about the different types of heritage diets that we offer. One of our first was the Mediterranean Heritage Diet, and that was created in partnership with the Harvard Public School of Health. We also have our Asian Heritage Diet. We have our vegan and vegetarian diet. And lastly, our Latin American and our African Heritage Diet. What's unique about those two is that they offer cooking class curricula. So if you want to start teaching cooking classes and doing cooking demonstrations and learning more about nutrition education, that's a fun way to really get engaged is through our African and our Latin American heritage curriculas. What we're also known for at Oldways, because we are small but mighty, we have our culinary travel. So for those of you who want to travel abroad with us and learn about, you know, not only cooking techniques, ingredients, meeting with the chefs, going on the farms, you can definitely find more information on our website. This year, we are doing our first ever culinaria to Mexico, in which we are taking people to the Oaxaca region. And I would love to promote it for y'all to join, but we are already sold out. We just this was our first year piloting it, and it sold out so quickly, which is such a great sign for the program, because once we've done it once and we see that people are there and interested, we will offer it again and again and again. So it's amazing that for those of you who are signed up, and if you have missed that deadline, don't worry. I know that we will be doing more trips to Latin America, Latin and Central, South, Latin America in general. So just feel free to stay updated through our website. But that's one aspect of Oldways is our travel. We're also part of the Whole Grains Council. So if you have been at your grocery store and looked at different whole grains products, you may see a little stamp on there. We're a part of that council that gets them approved. Therefore, organizations that want to have their products, within the Whole Grains Council, we work with them to make sure that they align with the guidelines. We also are a part of the Cheese Coalition, in which we offer our cheese plates. And so you could definitely find that information more on our website. And we have our Plate Forward plates. So this is for our health partners that want more access into getting these nutritional resources a part of their facilities. And we have for anyone who is within the registered dietitian field that needs continuing educational credits, we also have that available on the website too, where you can find out more on, obtaining and keeping your certification. So a lot of things that we offer for a team of 10, but we really do like to be there for the community. And so I just love to share a little bit about all that we do. Getting a little bit more into the heritage diets that I focus with. These are just the years that they've all been created. So our newest heritage diet would be our African heritage, although our Latin American heritage is our newest, most recently updated curriculum because we've always had it available within the digital yearly subscription, but now we have the new printed editions that could be available for purchase through our website. What's nice about them is that they never expire, so you can always have them on your shelf readily available whenever you want to offer a workshop or bring these classes to your community. So that is just a little overview of the heritage diets. And for time's sake, I won't go into the development, but I will talk about the development of the Latin American Heritage Program just because it's very unique compared to our others. Essentially, it was introduced at a conference in El Paso in 1996. And a decade later, after this introduction at the conference, we gathered with the at a Latin American Diet Summit in Mexico City to re-examine the science behind the pyramid that was developed in 1996. At that summit, we talked with our advisory board members about the graphics, the science behind it, and we decided to update it again in 2009 in a way that best showcased the abundance and deliciousness of Latin American heritage cuisines. So when you're looking at this timeline, technically our Latin American heritage pyramid was created before the vegan vegetarian diet pyramid, but after going back and reviewing with our advisory board members, we wanted to make sure the evidence-based effectiveness was up to date and, really resonated within the community. So then we had the official pilot and everything available in 2009. So that is just a little bit about the development of the Latin heritage diet. Now, what I really love about this graphic that you'll see over to the left is this just talks about the similarities and what we can learn from each of our heritage diets. And I think that what stands out to me is when we're talking about heritage diets is too often people with diet-related diseases have been getting the message that foods that they are grown with eating is unhealthy. And we like to go against that negative stereotype because things that we highlight within our cultural models that stand out the most is that they reclaim an often unsung heritage of healthy eating for people of diverse backgrounds. And so what we like to say is these heritage diets are not prescriptive, they're descriptive. And so with our heritage diet pyramid, the purpose is being inclusive and saying, here are all the ways and ingredients and foods that you can eat and that you shouldn't have to limit yourself to, these specific portions or specific ingredients. And when we're talking about the old ways of eating, the ways that our ancestrals ate, it was plant-based, it was healthy, it was nutritional, it was, very valuable and empowering. And so we like to continue that message. And the purpose of the heritage diet is not to say that there is only one right way to eat, but to continue celebrating the diversity of foods that can lead to good health and overall our good well-being. So a quote from one of my favorite cookbook authors, Marcial Priscilla, is to cook this food is to help knit the fabric of family. And she is the author of Cocina Foodways. And so she has a gigantic cookbook if you're ever looking for cookbooks to check out. And I highly recommend all of her books on Latin American foodways. So great. These are just information, infographics that we have, because at Oldways, we are a 501c3 nonprofit. So having nutrition information and resources is incredibly important to us because we want to make it as accessible as possible. So if you are offering classes or just wanting to learn more about ingredients and ways of getting started to learning more about the heritage diets, we offer tons of free resources through our websites. And I think it's important that when we're talking about diets per se, is no single diet can accurately represent eating patterns of all people on earth. So when we're talking about our heritage diets, these were developed organically because different crops thrive in different regions, and those foodscapes of these places have been shaped by traders, explorers, and those enslaved and immigrants that have moved across the globe. So within our Latin heritage and even our African heritage, which I'll go into the next couple of slides, we talk about regional profiles. For an example, people of East Asian or African descent are far more likely to be lactose intolerant than those of Northern European descent. So naturally, dairy was not an important source of nutrition in those parts of the world. That's why it's important that when we're talking about heritage diets, we're talking about the regional profiles of the land and those ingredients that are specific to that region to understand the foodways of the people that were raised there. And so there's plenty of more that I could deep dive into, but for time's sake, I'm just going to be focusing on, the significance of our Latin and our African heritage, because this conversation will be talking about, those of African descent traveling down to Mexico. And so it involves, what's unique about this conversation is it involves both of our heritage diets, our African and our Latin. So, and before I move forward, talking about why it's important to eat like our ancestors, because, you may think of Oldways heritage diets and you say, how come it's plant-based? Well, our ancestors primarily ate plant-based. They didn't always have access to animal proteins. And so through our heritage diets and our cooking classes, they are 100% plant-based. You won't see any meat or dairy, although instructors can implement that into the class series, but it's just a way of being very accessible for those with dietary restrictions. But also, what we like to say is that our ancestors, they enjoyed the meals, of course, the protein meat-based meals for special settings. Maybe it was for a celebration or a time to come together. And so it wasn't always in abundance. And so we offer, within the curriculum, plant-based, but if you check on our website, if you check out our recipe glossary, you'll see other dishes in there that talk about the historic significance of those meat-based dishes and why they are national dishes to various countries throughout Latin America. And we still talk about that within our heritage diet programs. Perfect. So I know I've been talking a lot about just overviews and the Latin heritage and just Oldways in general, but you're probably asking yourself, what is a taste of Latin American heritage? What is our Latin American heritage diet? So this program is bilingual. It's available in both English and Spanish. It's 6-week cooking class curricula. It goes over the Latin American Heritage Diet Pyramid. So over to the left, you've got our lessons for each week. The first being on herbs and spices, tubers and stews, third on whole grains. And so you could just follow that down while looking at the pyramid to see what we'll be talking about each week. And what's nice about this program is that all the resources are available automatically in English and Spanish translations. That includes the PowerPoint slides, all the recipes, the participant surveys. And it has a similar model as far as, free teachers training that's available for the Latin and the African heritage. But when we're talking about the regional profiles, that's where it differs, of course. So the regional profiles that our Latin heritage diet focuses on, and it's got the region, but it also has the cultural groups. So I'll get into the cultural groups first. Within our Latin heritage, we have the indigenous people. So we're going to talk about the Aztec, the Incas, the Mayans, and other Native American indigenous groups. It also is going to talk about the settlers that arrived in the 1500s. So it's going to bring in that Spanish and Portuguese influence. And then the continental Africans who were brought through the transatlantic slave trade you'll see the recipes and ingredients and ways that that influence has also become a part of the Latin American culinary cuisine discourse. So, and as far as regional focuses within the Latin American heritage diet, we've got a huge portion that focuses on Central and South America, the Caribbean islands, and Mexico, because that is, when we're talking about the American South, that encompasses what was originally Mexican territory. So that's why it's important that we talk about these regions distinctively. So going into that, what's really cool about our regional profiles within the Latin American Heritage Program is, when we're talking about Mexico, we think of ingredients such as chilies, beans, tomatoes, squashes, corn, the old world foods like cattle, pigs, livestock, as well as onion, garlic, and spices. So when we're talking about these dishes or these ingredients here, this is very unique to Mexico's culinary cuisine. And when we're talking about South America, we are taking into consideration all the varieties of seafood and tropical fruits, because you've got, the rainforest there. So you've got the tropical fruits, the nuts, the indigenous grains, tubers. And I think what makes it unique within the South American diet is the connection back to enslaved Africans, in which yams, okra, and peas were an added aspects to the culinary cuisine of that region. And throughout Central America, you've got corns, beans, coconuts, plantains, and fruits and vegetables of other staples. And due to the hot climate within Central America, there's a lot of slaws, pickled vegetables, in which people use to avoid cooking with heat, therefore to keep the temperatures down inside their homes. And we have a whole discourse just talking about tamales and how significant they are throughout the region of Central America. And every country has their own variation. And so it's really cool. And when we're talking about the Caribbean islands, some of the most important crops that we like to highlight there is the corn, the yuca, the guavas, the pineapples, the beans, the stews, the mashes. The mashed plantains are extremely common without the Caribbean islands, and you'll also see lots of seafood, cornmeal, tubers, and peppery spices. And that is a Latin influence throughout the Caribbean islands. Now, the reason why I talked about these ingredients and, the food ways of this, and I highlighted Mexico in particular, is because now I'm going to talk a little bit about the African heritage diet. And some of the things I said are going to sound familiar because it'll start to connect, as in understanding the African and the Latin heritage nexus of the American South and Mexico, Central America, and how the transatlantic slave trade led to some of those influences within the culinary cuisine. So let's back it further up to talk about the African heritage diet. Our African Heritage Diet is another 6-week cooking class curricula. It focuses on, it has 2 curriculas there. There's the Adults A Taste of African Heritage and the Children's. The 4 main regions of the African diaspora focuses on West and Central Africa, the American South, the Caribbean islands, and South America. And the motto within the curriculum is by reclaiming our heritage, we can reclaim our health. All of the recipes shared are 100% plant-based, so you won't see any meat or dairy. Now, going into the diaspora, from the other map that you saw as far as regional profiles within our Latin American heritage diet, if you notice, you see the Caribbean islands, Central and South America. And here is the map from of the African diaspora that's going to talk to you about how the migration of, well, the forced enslavement of those migrating from West and Central Africa, where they traveled, and what crops, what industry they were used as laborers to serve. So when we're talking about and some of the most important crops that were in need of that service. So you see here there is coffee, there's tobacco, there's cotton, sugar, mining, and rice. Rice you'll see a lot within the American South. You're thinking of the Carolinas, Gullah Geechee region. West African women were known for bringing the labor and having the skill sets of cultivating rice crops. Then within Latin Central America, you see a lot of sugar there. So, West Africans were brought over to Central America to not only help with mining, but you see a lot of the sugar symbol over there. And you also see the coffee within Central America. And so this is just to give a little bit of background understanding into, of course, you've got within the West Indies alone 4.5 million people brought over to this region to help within the agricultural industry, but also it's good to take it into connection of as to why there is also a culinary shift when we were talking about these regions and why they encompass the African heritage diet, because where there is a lot of a group of one nationality or, from a country, we are also talking about what they brought over and how that has had its impact within the local culinary cuisine, which is really unique. So now I'm going to go into the 4 regions and specifically highlight the American South. So early cooks within the American South, which, we're talking about Alabama, Louisiana, Texas. This is all land that, was a part of Mexico. They are some of the major crops that you'll see: beans, rice, squashes, sweet potatoes, and corn. So that probably sounds familiar when I was talking about the Latin American heritage within Mexico's region. Those are also very popular crops that you see there. And this is within the African heritage diet of what enslaved Africans were growing in their home gardens. Within the Caribbean islands, I talked about the spices and the peppery stews that you'll see within the Latin heritage. That can also be found within the Caribbean islands from the African heritage curriculum. One thing that we love to talk about is the rice and peas dish, which is very prevalent throughout the Caribbean islands. Usually you'll see it with coconut milk, and that coconut milk is very popular in dishes throughout the Caribbean islands from the Latin cuisine too. So that's just a really cool connection. So, and you'll also see within South America from the African and the Latin heritage curriculums, the peppery spices that is very prevalent within both heritage diets. So these are just a few connections that you can make within both the African and the Latin heritage to understand the ways of the past and how they influence today's heritage cuisine and the way we understand the heritage diets. So as far as understanding the regional profile within the American South of the African heritage culinary cuisine, we talk about, the rice, the cornmeal, the grits, the oats, the whole grains, which is very popular throughout the African heritage diet. And also within the African heritage diet in the American South, there is a prevalent of beans. So kidney beans, navy beans, lima beans, and black-eyed peas, which is when you're thinking about the Latin American heritage diet, you've got pinto beans, black beans. You also see black-eyed pea beans within the Latin heritage. And so these are just similarities in which people moving or, forced migrating to a different area figure out what is similar to the taste of home, and therefore creating dishes and recipes that resonate with their heritage, and then you seeing that influence and how that shows up within the local culinary cuisine. So I'm going to skip over this next slide for time's sake and go over to this slide to just give an example. So this is a sweet potato pudding that we have within the Latin American heritage cuisine. And I think it focuses, its roots are in the Caribbean islands. And so it's known for, although it's sweet potato, it's actually a less sweet pudding, more on the savory side. And it's very popular. If you haven't tried it, I recommend it. But what's unique about this is it is a Caribbean dish, and you can see the influences of, the name. Obviously, it is of Latin heritage, but you could also, when we're talking about popular crops and ingredients, sweet potatoes were also very popular within the American South. So a close kin or relative that we could say to this dish is you've got the sweet potato pudding. What's a sweet potato dish within the African heritage culinary cuisine that a lot of people think is one ingredient but isn't? Candied yams. Yams are not native to the Americas whatsoever. They are native to West and Central Africa. So if you've gone to a cookout or a gathering and they said, "Oh, these are candied yams," turns out unless they had it imported from West Africa and you can read the can, they're most likely sweet potatoes. And so this very popular dish that you see within African American foodways has always been for the longest sweet potatoes. And so the love of, candied yams, which is really candied sweet potatoes, to this sweet potato pudding isn't just a coincidence. You can see that influence there of how, people, West Africans being brought over to the Caribbean islands, wanting to have a dish that felt familiar to them and creating, working with what they had around them and, this mixture of cultures in creating the sweet potato pudding. So it's just really cool because within our heritage diets, we talk about ways that you can connect um, dishes back to their lineage and where the influences came from. And I think what's really cool about specifically our Latin and our African heritage diets is there's a lot of connection there that you'll see within a lot of the dishes that you can track back to what um, what indigenous group or what influence had that created some of those dishes. So we'll be talking more about that. Um, our other presenters, Karina and Maria, will be talking a little bit more about some of those foodways, but I just wanted to kind of get the conversation started. This is the bare bones, and this is just the foundational piece to build from, but it's a really fun journey. And the quote from Oldways that we like to share is, no matter what your ancestry is, tapping into your heritage and celebrating important cultural links to family and food can always help you motivate to change and reclaim good health. And lastly, before we end, Hispanic Heritage Month, I implore you to check out your local bodega or a restaurant of Latin heritage and, support local businesses. And, it's really fun to learn about these heritage dishes, practice your language speaking skills, and venture out because, we've got this month, but we like to celebrate our heritage diets all year long. But just something to get yourself started if you're thinking, where can I start? What's the first thing that I can do? Um, Check out your the restaurant that's nearby that is, sharing Latin foodways and dishes. And maybe there's a cooking class in the area that's being offered this month. And that's just a really good way to understand more of the beautiful culinary foodways and heritage within Latin American cuisine. As far as talking a little bit about our curriculum, um, it was designed with accessibility in mind. So plant-based, you don't need a fancy kitchen setup. You could do it at home. You could do it with a portable stove top. You could do it on a grill out back. It is, we want to make sure that it's just accessible as possible. So if you have any questions on getting access to the classes or cooking and becoming an instructor, you can always reach out to me and through Oldways. These are different types of partnerships that we work with: healthcare centers, nonprofits, schools, community gardens, farms. And so that's just a quick overview. This is what our curriculums look like. So the one over to the left is the children's, the one over in the middle is the adults African heritage, and to the right is our Latin American heritage curricula. So these are what the handbooks look like, and they're available through our web store. And lastly, here is a QR code. If you could scan there if you want to learn more about the classes. But we also have our e-course for the African heritage, and it's self-paced online. So this code here is now expired because we're no longer this was already past this event, but there is another QR code going on. So if you are interested in getting $5 off, just shoot me an email and I can send you the new code that we have for this month. But I am done presenting and sharing about Oldways. Thank you so much for um, hearing a little bit about my spiel, but I would love to hand over um, to the next speaker. And I believe it is Maria, Professor Maria, who will be talking about the culinary influences and going into the historic side of foodways. So I will mute myself, Maria. If you need me to allow you to share the screen, you should have access, but let me know.
I think I have access. Let's see. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Continue share, I guess. Yes. So thank you everybody for being here with us this afternoon. I am going to provide some context into the stories that Karina, into the stories and foodways that Karina is going to highlight. But in order for us to understand and situate those stories and those foodways, I'm going to give you some background on this, on the histories that led to those foodways and to this mixing of African and Latin American heritage. And so What I will start by saying is that the work that I do centers the Underground Railroad, the other side of the Underground Railroad, I should say. Often when we learn about the Underground Railroad or, escaping slavery, we often think of Canada or Canadian freedom destinations. But in these histories, um, even when they're rarely highlighted, Mexico also was a place that was considered a safe haven, and not just in the antebellum period, but long before the antebellum period. The histories that I've traced individuals escaping slavery in places like Louisiana or Alabama and heading to Mexican spaces even before Mexico was the Republic of Mexico. So during the colonial period, people were going to places like San Antonio, for instance, which was an early Mexican space of course, Mexico was at the time colonized by the Spanish crown. And so situating these histories and the stories of freedom and freedom destinations, in being inclusive of Mexican freedom destinations, I think we are able to get a more fuller story of where people sought freedom and what freedom may have looked like in those spaces. So one of the things that I argue is that when we think of the Underground Railroad, we should think of, yes, Canada, but also Mexico, also the Caribbean, also places that sometimes we don't think, but people made it to places like California or places like the Pacific Northwest, even to Vancouver Island. And so in that side of Canada, because sometimes when we think of the Underground Railroad, we only think of this side of Canada, not the other side. And so in a general way, what I hope that I offer with the work that I do is to expand our understandings of the geographies of the actors and the timelines of Black liberation in North America. And so the way that I've been able to recover this is looking at archival records. So I've spent many, many years going to archives in Mexico, but also in the United States, across the American South, in Canada as well. And so I've really delved into this archival spaces, trying to recover the stories of individuals who escaped and made their way southward instead of north. And to offer you context, I will give you a brief overview of what Mexican legal freedom, or I should say, Mexican legal abolition was like, or what shaped that, and then going to other aspects that shaped these uh, underground railroads, if you will, to Mexican spaces. So in order for us to situate the stories of why would people go to Mexico, what was driving people to Mexican spaces, and so I'd like to start by saying that before I started doing this work, I didn't really know much about the Underground Railroad. Or I grew up, was born and raised in Mexico. I didn't really learn about these histories, but I did know that Mexico had abolished slavery about 30 years before the United States did. So the abolition of slavery in Mexico came in 1829 officially, and it was passed by Vicente Guerrero. And that's all I knew. And then when I started doing this research, I started really questioning, one, how come we don't know or we don't situate that Mexico had abolished slavery 30 years before the United States? And why, when we think about freedom destinations, we think of Canada, but we don't think of Mexico? And so I started tracing the processes that were being endeavored in Mexico to abolish slavery. And so this is what I found out. I found out that as early on, even at the moment when Mexico began to fight for independence against Spain or against the Spanish crown, which was a fight that began in 1810 and really lasted about 10 years because the Republic of Mexico didn't secure their independence from Spain until 1821, or Mexico, I should say. And so it took about 10 years for that freedom to be secured from Spain. But what I found out in doing this research and retracing these laws that were being passed, that were being, became important laws that shaped Mexico's abolition processes, I started to realize that those people that were leading the fight for independence, that were at the forefront of that fight against Spain, were people that had a vested interest in abolishing slavery, a vested interest in freedom, or against, a vested interest against the abolition of chattel slavery, to be exact. And I started looking and questioning, but why did the people fighting for to be free from the Spanish crown had a vested interest in freedom? And what I found out is this: the majority of people that were fighting for a free Mexico, a Mexico free from Spanish rule, were mostly individuals that were either born enslaved themselves, or their parents were born enslaved, or their grandparents had been born enslaved. So you start seeing that those people that were considered insurgents leading this Mexican fight against the Spanish crown were indigenous, were Black, were Afro-Indigenous, were mestizo. And so they had a vested interest in abolition because they wanted to be able to, if they secured freedom from the Spanish crown, they wanted to be able to live free in this new country that they were fighting for. And they also wanted their children to be able to be free in this new nation, whatever that nation may end up being like. And so understanding this, understanding that the people that were fighting for the Mexican freedom from Spanish rule, from colonial rule, were Black, Indigenous, Afro-Indigenous Mexicans, allows us to situate or understand that why by 1829, Mexico had abolished slavery. And Mexico abolished slavery, in many different processes and many different laws that I put some of the key laws here for you to see. And this is not a comprehensive list, but it's just some of the key laws that were passed as early as 1810 that led to the full abolition of slavery in 1829. And the person that passed this decree in 1829 was an Afro-Mexican man by the name of Vicente Guerrero. And I like to say often when I talk about these stories was that, here in the United States, we've had one Black president in our modern era. But in Mexico, we had two Black presidents before 1860. So we had Vicente Guerrero, who abolished slavery, and then we had Juan Alvarez in 1855. And so it's important to situate that there were pathways to freedom, and that there was a process of legal abolition that was shaping Mexico, brewing, even if slowly, but it was shaping Mexico as early as 1810. And so people that were enslaved north of the United States, north of Mexico, in places like the United States, or places that were quickly transforming into the United States, because a lot of these borderlands, kept changing powers, in the 19th century, the people that held power across the U.S.-Mexico borderlands were in flux. So there were different governments across the board. And so, but people who were enslaved in north of Mexico began to hear of Mexico as a freedom destination, or in ways that they could say, hey, in Mexico, you could be free. And I'll tell you a little bit about how that also happened, how people heard about this. But I just wanted to show you this to give you context of what shaped Mexican legal freedom, and what may have shaped the understandings of people enslaved across the United States to say, I'm going to go south. I want to go to Mexico and see if I can claim freedom there, as opposed to making the trek northward to either northern states or to Canada. And so, so I started by tracing this, and then I started to really think about what were the networks to freedom alike. And so I started to recover. Again, I've been to over 63 archives across North America, and so I have a lot of different records that showcase what these networks to freedom look like. For instance, not only the networks, but what shaped these ideas that in Mexico you could be free, or in Mexico you could claim freedom. And so I'll tell you a little bit about the sources. So the networks to freedom that I found have been very diverse. We have Mexicans doing a lot of the helping. You find individuals here, Mexicans helping enslaved people make it to Mexico. You find townspeople in Mexico. So you get individuals escaping slavery, sometimes in groups or in whole families, making it to Mexico. Especially, this is a record that points that they arrived in the town of Monclova. A group of people arrived in the town of Monclova in 1840. I think this is 1849. And when they arrived in this town, they arrived with nothing on them. And as the record shows, they arrived only with what they were wearing. Some of them didn't have shoes, they didn't have water, they needed food, and they needed supplies. And so the townspeople gathered in Monclova and raised 246 pesos so that they could offer this group of individuals who had recently arrived, who didn't want to stay in Monclova. Monclova is in the borderlands. They wanted to keep going. And so they were able to assist this group to keep going, to get fed, to get clothes, and to get shoes, and to get supplies to continue on their journey further south or south into Mexico. I've also found, doing this history, is that a lot of indigenous individuals and groups were also doing some of the helping. And you see here as this Choctaw individual was actually caught and jailed for writing fake passes to people so that they could make it to Mexico or pass through certain areas. And so I do start seeing, Mexicans were doing some of the helping, indigenous people were doing some of the helping. And of course, a lot of the times, for instance, when we know of people doing helping and being in these networks, often we only hear about those that were caught, and that's why we have records of people that were caught. But there were countless others that weren't caught, and so we don't really hear about them because a lot of these individuals didn't want to leave records and didn't want people to know that they were helping people to Mexico. It was a crime after all. And so it's important to understand that there were these networks, but also in on the other side of these networks, I also saw, and this is important to note when I talk about this history, is that I've also found both um, indigenous people and Mexican people doing the opposite of helping. So I've seen Mexicans working as slave hunters. I've seen indigenous people also working as slave hunters or preventing people from making it to Mexico and then reselling them back to slavery. So these are very complex histories. And so, but nevertheless, it's important to know that individuals were part of these networks, even though when sometimes records do show that they were sometimes helping slaveholders. But at the end of the day, what is very important for me to highlight about this work is that it were Black Americans, Black women, men, and children who were leading these networks to Mexico. They themselves had the vested interest in claiming freedom, in being free. So they were the first ones engineering those networks to Mexico. And then they were not just engineering them in physically by making their way to Mexico and crafting their own pathways and going through the terrain and making a plan and making it there. So yes, they were physically going, but they were also Black women and men and children intellectually situating Mexico as a freedom destination and letting others know that they could go to Mexico. And I have these two records to showcase that. For instance, this record here, it's a letter that was written by a Black woman abolitionist, who sent a letter to the Liberator, who was an abolitionist newspaper, saying basically saying we should go to Mexico. In Mexico, we can do this and this and this. And in Mexico, we can find prosperity. And she basically starts by saying, where is that country where and I think it's right here. I know it's small, but she says, um, some of your readers may inquire, where is that country in which we may remove and thus become free and equal? I believe that country to be Mexico. And so you start seeing that Black women right here begin to conceive Mexico as a freedom destination, and she publicizes it. Was published in the Liberator, and then other newspapers took that, and so you start creating this understanding that yes, in Mexico you can be free. And also we have a Black abolitionist in this record right here, where Black abolitionists were in direct conversation with Mexican abolitionists in as early as the 1830s, where they were corresponding and saying, hey, if we go to Mexico, what can we have? Like, well, what will that look like? And so they were asking not just how can we be free. So this is important to note. They were not just asking how can we be free. They were asking, yes, how can we claim freedom? But second, how will the Mexican people receive us? How can we secure land? And they were not asking for how can we get land. They were asking how can we buy land, and they were also asking principally, how do we become citizens? So equality, citizenship, and land was very important to Black Americans in their conversations and discussions about Mexico and Mexican freedom. They had a vision of not only situating Mexico as a freedom destination, but they wanted to make sure that in Mexico, yes, they could be free, but also could they get citizenship? Could they be equal? Could they have land? And so the Mexican government would respond, and I found the responses of the Mexican government, particularly Mexican abolitionists that were working with Black abolitionists, to say, yes, you can come and we'll give you land for cultivation, we will become citizens. And so there were all this negotiations being endeavored, but they were first propelled by Black abolitionists in Philadelphia and other places, making sure that they were reaching out to Mexico to say, hey, okay, if we go, what can we have? And so this is some of the ways that Black Americans themselves um, created these opportunities or these avenues or engineered these routes to freedom intellectually, not just physically by going to Mexico. So it's important to situate so that you can get an understanding that these processes, these networks to Mexico were more than just physical. They were being created by, intellectual processes as well, propelled by Black abolitionists. And so now that I've situated, these networks and freedom in Mexico, I am going to narrow down, and I know I don't have that much time to go into detail, but I do want to tell you about this one woman that, and I found many women, but in the course of my studies, or I guess I should say, when I started doing this work, I did this work because I was sitting in a class in Eastern North Carolina at East Carolina University, and we're talking about the Underground Railroad. We were talking about Harriet Tubman, and I wanted to know, I didn't know much about this history, by the way, but I wanted to know who were the Harriet Tubmans who led people to Mexico. And I raised my hand and I asked my professor, and my professor just asked, said, that's a very good question, Maria. If you find out, please let me know. And that is what got me to on this pathway. That answer from my professor got me into this work, got me to go and research and find the answer to my questions. And so what I have found is that, many people led the Underground Railroad to Mexico, but that there were also many people, many women, Black women, who, like Harriet Tubman, who did similar work like Harriet Tubman, but led people south to Mexico as opposed to what Harriet Tubman did to northern spaces. And one of those women was Sylvia Hector. And I will share the biography of Sylvia Hector with Sarah so that she can share it with all of you if you are interested. But I'll give you briefly. Sylvia Hector was one of the women who assisted people to Mexican spaces by ferrying them to freedom. Her story is not unique by any means, but it's very empowering because she not only claimed her freedom, but the freedom of her 3 children. But even when she lived in a very limiting space like Central Texas first and then Southern Texas, even with those limitations of being a free Black person in a place like Texas, she never stop helping people to freedom or harboring them in her home. And so she is an important figure, and there are many records that we have found, and I say we because I started this work, but now her descendants have joined this work, and they have also helped recover a lot of her story. And so she really has, her story has really helped us reconsider the stories of liberation and the women that led underground railroads to Mexico. So I encourage you to read more about her with the biography, to look at the descendants' work. I also shared their website. But to merge into the foodways, I wanted to highlight Sylvia because Sylvia also plays a role um, in some of the foodways that I've encountered that people took as they were escaping to Mexico. And so in some of the records that I have found, I have encounter documentation where they point that Sylvia um, uh, uh, sorry, sometimes I get lost in translation, where Sylvia worked with peaches. She did peach preserves, or she sold peaches for a living. As a family, her husband, and her children had lived in an area where there were a lot of peaches. So records show that they would sell peaches to neighbors and then preserves. And so at first I was like, when I came to those references and those sources, I was thinking peaches in Texas, like where is this coming from? And then I started doing research about peaches in Texas. And so I found that peaches were abundant in at this period of time in Texas, and that there were fine peach orchards all around this area in Weber's Prairie. Now, Weber's Prairie is in this area right here in Weberville, Texas, which is about 16 miles um, east, southeast of Austin. And this is the place that was founded by Sylvia and her husband. So Weberville was founded by Sylvia and her husband, and she was the first Black woman to live in the area that now constitutes Travis County. And she was the first free Black woman because by the time she moved into this area that later becomes Travis County, which was 1834, this area was not yet Austin. It was not yet Travis County, but it was sort of like the frontier of the Austin colonies. And she moved there after she secured her freedom in 1834. And so this Weberville area, she helped settle. I'm not sure if she helped plant the peach trees, but I do know that some of the work that she did was work with peaches. She sold peaches, she sold preserves. And the neighbors also have some of the recollections that I've recovered from neighbors. They always talk about how their peaches were the best. And so this got me into doing some work on peaches. And then I started finding a lot of documentation, particularly runaway slave advertisements, for instance, that pointed to people gathering peaches as they were crossing or as they were escaping. They will take peaches either, to survive the routes as they were trying to make it to freedom. And so you start seeing some of this documentation, and that's what I wanted to show with you, that you do see a lot of conversations on peaches. And it was interesting to me. And of course, this is still a work in progress, but this is something very important that I think that we seldom ever think about the foods waste that people took in order to survive their channels of liberation and in order to survive these trips to freedom. Other records that I found is, and this is a very hard document to process and to teach, because of course this man was not was not able to live through the experience of running away, but you do see here in documents like this the things that people carried in order to survive. Most individuals not just went unplanned. They had months to plan their escape, and they prepared. They would take clothing, they would take shoes, they would take things to sell, they would take wallets, shirts, 25 pounds. This man had taken 25 pounds of bacon, 1 to 2 gallons of cornmeal. And so you start seeing that they would make sure to take food stuff, either to survive or to barter with people along the way to get safe passage. Sometimes they had to barter with indigenous communities so that they would allow them to pass through their land. And they had to give, either food or clothing. And so it's important to understand in the channels that I call them channels of liberation to Mexico, that people took not only their dreams and their visions to be free, but they took a lot of the stuff, like physical stuff, in order to survive those journeys. And food was at the forefront of those planning of those items that they took in order to make it to freedom. And that is all I have. But with this context, I think that you may be able to now better understand the context in which the story of the Black Seminoles who made it to Mexico happened. And Corina is going to tell you about the foodways that have shaped the heritage of the Black Seminoles in northern Mexico, and the foodways that she grew up um, eating and enjoying in celebration of um, you know, her ancestors.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me today. So I'm going to share with you today just comfort food that's food, comfort food for me that I grew up eating every time we would go to Mexico. Some of these foods I still have here in the United States, but a lot of it I just have when I go to Mexico. So when I was 7 years old, um, my family migrated into Texas, and so I went to school here. I grew up here, but during our summer vacations, we would go back to Mexico, especially for our Juneteenth celebration there. And every time we go to Mexico, we always want cabrito. So cabrito is goat, like a small goat, and we usually have it asada or we have it like a guiso. That is one of our favorite things. My whole family, we all love it, and sometimes we go and they're not, you know, there's not that cabrito yet. You have to wait till they get older, or so there's a process with cabrito too that you have to wait on. But my dad has a goat ranch, and so he makes like a sour cream from it that is so good. And I just called him the other day and I was like, Dad, have you ever made butter, from the cream? And he's like, no, but we used to when we were little, and then he's like, my dad would have us put it in a jar and shake it, um, the cream. So I'm looking forward to going and doing that, making the butter out of the goat milk and the cream and all that. I never have, so it's gonna be a new um experience for me. And so I wanted to share, my aunt in the kitchen, and that's her kitchen in Mexico, and she's cutting it up, and you know we just get together, and we can't wait for it to till it's ready. But these are two pictures. One of them over here with the foil is asada, and then the other one is like guisada with like a gravy and spices. Okay, am I able to continue from here? Okay, so this is mole. Everybody knows mole, um, especially in Oaxaca, but I never had mole from scratch. but we always ate it, you know, and in El Nacimiento, and we eat it. My mom still makes it here in Texas, chicken mole. But I cannot wait to go to Oaxaca one of these days and try their different moles there. I wanted to share that because that's another one of my favorite things to have as mole, but it's not from scratch. So I just wanted to share one of my favorite foods. Okay, and these are oxtails. Now, oxtails are my favorite thing to eat. We grew up eating oxtails, and to this day, some of my friends, they've never had an oxtail. And the reason why we ate a lot of oxtails was because they were so affordable back then. Now you can't, they're so expensive. Even when you go to the restaurant, they're super expensive to order. But we always had it in a caldo. Um, and and of course, with the caldo, whatever vegetables you had, you put in there. But if you've never had oxtails, I know that I'm saying this now and they're kind of expensive. Please, you must try them. Um, it's one of my favorite foods, and we ate that in Mexico a lot, but we also ate it here when we moved to Texas. We always had them. And this picture of the sauce and the molcajete, we always have to have that when we go to Mexico. It's chile piquin. So they harvest chile piquin there in Nacimiento. Um, there's a time where everybody goes to pick the chile piquin and everybody has it and it's in jars and they sell it. And it's just chile piquin, tomate, which is tomatoes and garlic and salt. It's a delicious sauce. And every time we go to Mexico, that's another thing that we always look forward to because somebody always has either a jar of it or a box of chile bean. So these are another. I don't know why my mouth is watering. These this is another food that I just wanted to share because it's my favorite sauce, salsa.
It looks like she's frozen.
Karina, can you hear us? Oh, we can see the mouse moving. Oh, let me chat her.
I'm the one moving the mouse because I have
Oh,
yes. Okay, she might be coming back again.
okay.
And I wish I could tell you about this, but she knows more about this.
Yes, yeah. Literally, when I saw the oxtails, I was like, oh, you can definitely see the connection
Hmm.
to the African heritage cuisine. I mean, from the Caribbean islands, they'll do like a
Hmm.
peppery seasoning, and and my family, we grew up with braised oxtails. So that's
Yeah,
really sounds everything just looks mouth-watering and delicious, talking about
yeah.
ways that it was a part of her upbringing and
I could
yeah.
tell you a little bit of background in the meantime that Corina comes back about the Black Seminoles.
Mhm.
So most of the Black Seminoles that arrived, well, Black Seminoles were individuals who were originally from Florida and they were living alongside the Seminole people, but with the Trail of Tears, they were pushed out of the South Carolina and Florida regions and pushed into native reservations in Oklahoma. But when they were pushed to native reservations, a large group of them, that some of them were Seminoles, but the majority were Black Seminoles, they decided to not stay in the native reservations because a lot of them were facing re-enslavement. And so they decided to instead join forces and go to Mexico and petition the Mexican government for land and citizenship. And they arrived in Mexico and they went straight, a group of them, a contingency, went straight to Mexico City to petition for land in 1850. And well, it was a little bit earlier, but in 1850, Mexican government um, conceded their petitions, and so they gave them land grants in northern Mexico, which is today El Nacimiento de los Negros. And there were other regions. So El Nacimiento de los Negros was one of the land grants, but there was also another land grant in Parras, another land grant in El Morral, and another land grant actually in Durango. So there were several land grants, but the largest one was El Nacimiento. And so some Seminole people and the Black Seminoles were able to get these land grants and move into these spaces in northern Mexico, being recognized as settlers, as citizens. And so this is what shapes this history of them moving into northern Mexico. And then because they had experienced enslavement in some sort, even though when they arrived in Mexico, they were not enslaved per se, because they were already free, they were just being put into reservations. But because they were settling there in northern Coahuila, they also began welcoming people that were escaping slavery. So a lot of people that were considered runaways would join and get to the community, and they would just stay there and live there among this community. And today, the community at El Nacimiento continues to hold their land that was given to them in the 1850s. And some of the records that I have found in Mexico, in Coahuila and Mexico City, is, for instance, one of the documents was a group of 700 individuals crossed the Rio Grande on July 13th of 1850. It was the largest crossing. And among this record of 700, the Mexican government documented that it was 700 people who crossed that day, and that it was not just Seminoles, but it was Black Seminoles and also runaway slaves that crossed those 700. And in part of this research that I've done, I've also recovered, for instance, the um, the record of one of the Black women who crossed on that day, on July 13th of 1850. Her name was Becky Simmons. And Becky Simmons basically was interviewed when she was an elderly woman in the 1840s, I believe, was interviewed by a scholar who went down there and started doing research, oral histories of the Black Seminoles. And she tells him the story of what it felt to cross the river at night. It was in the middle of the night. What it felt, what she heard. She talks about the children crying and how she was getting anxious because she wanted to get away, as far away from the enslavers, from the, she says, American race people. And so it's seldom do we get to hear about the experiences of Black women doing this journey south, but also to get an oral history of someone who lived it and survived it was very powerful to me to find. And so just that's how I came to meet Corina, because I've been doing research into into some of her own ancestors who arrived in the 1850s. And I've been able to also learn so much from the community and from her, and from the descendants that still live in Mexico. And of course, after 1865, so some of the members of El Nacimiento ended up moving, leaving El Nacimiento. Not all of them. Some of the families just moved back to the U.S. and just moved just across the border. So they settled Brackettville, Texas. So Brackettville, Texas today is the sister city of El Nacimiento. And so when they have festivals, you see people coming from El Nacimiento to Brackettville to Seminole Days. And then you see when they have the Juneteenth festival in Mexico, in El Nacimiento, you see people from the families from Brackettville going to Nacimiento. And I guess since Corina hasn't made it back, I could mention that when we think about Juneteenth and the history of Juneteenth, we often think that, Juneteenth is only celebrated in the United States, but Juneteenth has been celebrated in Mexico since the late 1870s, in el Nacimiento de los Negros. The people del Nacimiento, even though they were free on Mexican soil long before 1865, they began celebrating as a way to celebrate their brothers and sisters who had just claimed freedom, or found out that they were free in 1865. And so Juneteenth does have that transnational story as well that connects us. And so I wanted to share that, a little bit of the background that also highlights the Black Seminoles in Nacimiento. And Corina's back, so she can tell you
Oh,
more
perfect.
about
Hi,
the
Corina.
foodways.
I'm so sorry. I tried to get on my phone. I don't know what happened. The lights flicker.
No
You're good,
worries.
you're good.
We just had a really good overview by Maria, just talking about El Nacimiento and Juneteenth and its historic significance, and talking about, the foodways. And so 700 people, I'm still, wow. Like that's
That was one crossing
one
only. That was just
crossing,
one
one
crossing.
day,
There were a
700
lot more,
people.
but
Wow.
all right,
Wow.
Corina, take it away.
Yes.
And I was where? This is where I was?
Yes.
Okay, so I also love what we call the Cuaresma, which is, it's known here as Lent food that you eat, when the whole Easter thing's happening. Um, and and so what I have here in this bowl is a batter of egg white with shrimp powder. And we never had fish when I was little in Nacimiento. We had it all the time from the river, but when it was Lent, we always had tortas de camarón, and which tortas de camarón are shrimp patties. And then we also had potato patties, which it's right under the torta de camarón, is made out of boiled potatoes and tomato, onion, peppers. And then you also batter it with the egg white. And then we had lentils and nopalitos. Nopalitos is something that we eat all the time. The cactus. We eat the prickly pears, which I wish I would have put a picture of my prickly pear juice that I made a while back, picking the prickly pears off the road here in Texas. But so this is another thing that we eat now. I eat it. I just make it, whenever I want to eat it. But that's something that my mom always made for us, and we all helped in the kitchen to make these because there was a lot of patties that we had to make because it was 5 of us in the 5 kids in the house. So this is another dish that's one of my favorites. Um, was that is that the next one, Mari? Okay, so the ones that I think I'm gonna share now is things that they make still in Nacimiento now. I don't make them, but when I go there, I enjoy them, and I've never had this. This is a fruit punch that we're looking at, and it's made with fresh fruit and other spices that I'm not sure of, but when it's like December, January time, and you go to Nacimiento, everybody has fires outside. A lot of people do a lot of their cooking outside still. And so this pot of fruit punch is so good. I do not even know how to describe it, but somebody will have a pot of that fruit. I've never had it here in the United States. I don't know if if they even make it here, but this is another one of my favorite things there in Nacimiento.
What's the name of the dish again?
This is just a fruit punch. So That's how they call it there, and they usually make it just for the winter,
Does it have cinnamon
during
or
the winter.
allspice in it?
It does have some, yes, like I think even um maybe some nutmeg, I think. It does have different spices, and I do have a video of, because I asked, what is in this punch? And I do have a video of that in my camera, but I just couldn't get it on here. But um, next time I'll be more careful about getting the ingredients. Uh, so this is one of my something that that we still make there. The people that live there, I don't make it. So me growing up, my grandfathers on my mom and my dad's side were Black Seminoles. So everybody that had the Black Seminole grandmothers that were there living with them, they're the ones that, were growing up with all these different foods. And so that's how we have this punch. And then I'm gonna share with you other foods that that they make there. So this is Doña Chita. She's grating sweet potato, and she's grating it with the skin, and she's grating it to make the tapun. So Doña Chita, everything she makes is delicious. I mean, every single thing. So when I go over there and they're cooking, I'm ready for them to invite me to eat. So this is the process of the tapun. So she grates it and everything and mixes it with spices and some lard, and it has to be like pig lard. And then they put it in these skillets and cook the skillets, and then they cook the tapun, and it's not um sweet potato pudding, but it's not sweet potato pie either. I don't know how to describe it, but it is very delicious too. And then this is the tetapun. This is how it looks. We had Seminole Days this year in September, and we're starting to revitalize Afro Seminole Creole, which is the language that they would speak in Mexico, which is kind of like the Gullah language um with Creole in it, and so we had a loteria card, which is a you would call it bingo, but it's kind of a picture and then it has the name. And we had somebody from St. Helena Island there. And she was looking at it and reading it, and she says, "Oh, I love me some tetapun." And I looked at her and I said, "What did you say?" And she's like, "I love," and I said, "Do you know what that is?" And she says, "Yes." So I never knew the connection of where that tetapun came from, because nobody else makes it in Mexico. I think, and around our area, we're the only ones that make tetapun, in Nacimiento. And so I was so happy to find that connection, with the South Carolina, Georgia people of where tetapun came from. And so that connects us, to the Africans being brought over, into South Carolina, Georgia, and liberating themselves, into Florida, and of course the Trail of Tears into Oklahoma, and them leaving Oklahoma into Mexico. So I was so happy to have found, the connection of the Tetapun into the Carolinas, and it's delicious too. Okay, this is another one that I've never seen had anywhere else. And as y'all can see, my mouth is watering because I just love this food. This is
I'm hungry.
a sour a sour fried bread, corn fried bread. So it's made out of corn. Um, they have to mash the corn because they still use a mortero, which is a pesto and mortar. Is that how you say it, Maria?
Yes, yes.
Okay, they still use that in Nacimiento. You know, people have their morteros there. So they mash the corn, and they have to soak this in water for about 2 days. I guess until it starts getting that little sourness. And it's like a 3-4 day process to make this. And then they make the batter, mix it, and fry it. It doesn't look fried, but it is, and it's so good. Um, Especially if you have honey and you put honey over it. And it's one of my favorite things to eat. Also, you'll find people making it, in December, January time. Okay, so this is the sosque. I don't know why I don't have a picture of the sosque. I think because every time we go to Nacimiento and we eat sosque, it's all gone. We don't even think about it. But the sosque is also made out of corn. It's crushed, and it has a little ingredient that's ashes from the fire. And I visited Oklahoma a while back, and this is the sosque from Oklahoma. And I wanted to see if the sosque was the same, and it's exactly the same the way we make it in Nacimiento. The taste, and all the way down um to the ashes. They add ashes there too. And that is something that every time I eat it just brings me memories, of when I was little and we ate it all the time in Mexico. So I don't need Sosca every time I go to Mexico, but if somebody has it, I always want it. I don't make it. I've never made it, but they still make it there also. Um, and then this is piloncillo with nuez. So piloncillo is kind of like raw sugar cane, and we used to make it a lot. We didn't eat a lot of candy nacimiento when I was little that I can remember, but we had we would harvest pecans, and I remember being little and everybody would go to pick pecans, and we all had our little bucket, and this was one of the things that, one of the treats that we would have. And so every time I have this in Mexico too, or here, it just takes me back to those days where, everybody would go down the road with their little bucket and pick pecans, and we always ask for pecans with piloncillo. And so this is the dish. Is delicious. And it is a process too. You have to stir and make sure it doesn't get too sticky, to a right consistency, and add the pecans and maybe some cinnamon in there. But I wanted to share that because that's another one of my favorite things too. And thank you, gracias, Tanky.
Thank you. And thank you is in well, Corina can tell you.
In Afro Seminole Creole, which is Tanky, and how Hana da do? How are y'all?
Yes.
And so now we're opening up for questions. Whoever has any questions, we are, very excited for to hear your thoughts too.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Karina and Maria, for just the overview. And now I'm starving after seeing some of those dishes. Oh, the oxtail, And the sweet potato bread, oh my goodness, that all looks amazing. And the goat too. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Wow. I knew when I asked you to share the photos that probably should have packed myself a snack.
Me too. I am hungry now.
Yeah. But that was really engaging. And I even put some notes in the comment section here, just bringing in some of those connections. You had talked about a prickly pear drink, and we actually have an agua fresca on the Oldways recipe glossary. So I
Yeah.
shared that there just in case anyone wants to know what the prickly pear tastes like. We made a agua fresca there. And then that tea that you were talking about, it sounds familiar to sorrel tea. Does that ring a bell? Do you know if it does it have like a reddish hue to it?
It does.
I'm
It does.
curious if it is
You-
that. So
Mhm.
it's a popular Christmas drink that you'll see throughout the Caribbean islands, but especially in
Okay,
Jamaica.
it is. They do call it a Christmas drink. It's a Christmas fruit punch
That is so
there.
cool. That is so cool. Like you
Mhm.
could see the connection there. And you've had that since growing up. It's always been around.
Yes, yes. And like I was telling Maria, I don't because I guess I lived in that.
Mhm.
It doesn't seem like it's important, but um so when I started learning the history, I understood how important it was because I never knew the history. But the food, I eat it out of all the time. Even though I don't make a lot of that food, they still make it there. I grew up with it, so I really didn't think much of it. So, but I see that it is important, and I realized the connection when I first, found out where the sosque came from, and now the tetapun, and well, maybe even the punch now.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Mhm.
No, and that's so interesting too, because I loved that you brought in the tetapun, the one pot dish, because you even when you said it was made in one pot, I was thinking of what you had referred to of the Gullah Geechee cuisine, so of the Carolinas and the Georgia region, which when I was talking earlier about Carolina gold rice, a lot of West
Yeah.
Africans came to the American South to help with the rice agricultural,
Mhm.
and it was very popular within West African region, these one pot cooking techniques. So an
Mhm.
entire meal like jollof rice can be prepared, feed the entire family in one pot. And so that, way of cooking was, brought over with the people within to the Gullah Geechee region. And there you see a lot of dishes like rice pilafs and seafood dishes, just because that's what's close to the region. So it's a coastal
Exactly.
region, so you got a lot of seafood influences. So when you were talking about in this Tetapun, is it also prevalent in El Nacimiento, the town? Like do
The tetapon?
mhm.
Yeah.
Yes. Nobody else around there makes it. Only Nacimiento.
See,
Mhm.
and that's how you can tell a direct influence of
Mhm.
people who migrated there, because that cooking technique was brought, and then how it was used prepared of all things sweet potato bread, which is what I was talking about a little
But
earlier, is
mhm.
that
I
connection
thought
between.
about that when you shared that. I was like, oh my God, we have the tetapon in Nacimiento.
Yes,
Yes.
yeah. It's just so cool to make these connections of, ways that you've grown up and had these foods but never thought of the significance. And that's things that we're still learning about within all the heritage diets. That's what Old Ways and many other partners and research centers are trying to do, is make that connection so we can understand the movement of people and that historic significance to the culinary cuisine of the area.
Yeah.
So, like my favorite tidbit that I love to share, and this is just kind of an easy one, but jambalayas closest kin is jollof rice, which traces back to West Africa. And so that's how we're able to understand the roots of the influences of that dish. So this is really fun because I mean, and I remember when I met you too, but how I connected with Maria was at a Juneteenth event. And so talking about the Underground Railroad, which, you know, in the US we talk about the northern route, but you don't hear much about the southern route. And so I was like, this would be really cool to talk about the foodways and the connection to that. So thank you so much for your time. This has been such a fun conversation. Even I've taken some notes. And I wanted to share in the chat for everyone too. Um, Maria, the article you shared. Okay.
Oh yes, on
Yes.
the woman that reached northern Mexico, I think it's Monclova too, who escaped from Mississippi.
Mhm.
And so the story is that, you know, and during that time period, butter was not actually a thing or a commodity utilized in northern Mexico at that point. Most people utilized lard, and but this woman began, you know, she escaped slavery, she made it to Mexico, claimed her freedom, and then she set up shop. Literally, she set up a shop where she sold butter, and accounts talk about how her butter and her milk products were the most delicious in the town. And so it's a brief introduction into how this woman um, introduced butter into northern Mexico during a time where, you know, most people consume lard, but she had a shop and she was thriving. And a lot of these stories we rarely ever get to know about stories like hers. Of course, we don't really have her name. I'm still looking for her name in the archives. But hopefully one day I will. But I don't think it's necessary to know her name in order to highlight her story and, you know, how amazing um, her experience was by setting up shop and having a market, um, manufacturing butter at that time. And this was the 1830s, by the way.
Yes, and I've shared the link in the comment in the webinar chat below, and I'll also we'll also share it on Oldways social media too, but it's a really cool story. I recommend you guys check it out. But yeah, just leaving open the space. Is there any more questions? Oh, Maria, perfect. You've been answering some of them. Thank you.
Yeah. Also, there is the other publication that I sent you
Mhm.
centers two women who led people to freedom as well, beyond the story of Sylvia that I featured in the presentation. And I think that that's an excellent piece if you want to learn, just to get an introduction into who were the women who were crafting these journeys to freedom and assisting others, not just themselves, to Mexican spaces.
Yes, and I know I have that as a PDF. Am I allowed to? I can share that one also. Okay,
Feel free
perfect,
to share.
perfect.
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah.
awesome, awesome.
Yes.
Perfect, perfect. But yes, no, it's really interesting. I love that you really did bring up a very great point about hearing it from the woman's perspective of, you know, that narrative being told of the migration to Mexico, because you always hear more from the male's perspective in the history books. So it is really, it's really cool to thank you for the research that you're doing.
Thank you. No, thank you. And we're here to answer any questions you may have. I think we have a few more minutes, so I'm excited.
Oh, thank you, Sandra. One of our participants said, not a question, but thank you for all the amazing presentation. And you guys were absolutely fabulous.
Thank you.
Well, great. I had one question for you, Karina. Could you tell me a little bit about Sasuke? Like, what does it taste like? Because I'm reading up on the description. They say it has like kind of like a sour taste to it, and like with the wood ash, like I'm curious, does it have like a smoky, taste to it? Like I'm just
No,
curious.
it doesn't have a sour taste,
Hmm.
so they make it, they boil it, and they kind of add the ash, like I think they added like for maybe thickness, uh
Hmm.
a certain consistency. But after it's done, then you can put whatever you want. You can put sugar, cinnamon, and just mix it and eat it like that. That's normally how we eat it. Um, and everybody in Nacimiento usually it's sweet. We sweeten it up. We don't
Hmm.
we put a lot of sugar.
Yes.
So it's not sour at
So
all.
is it more of like a porridge? Like, would you have this for
Yes,
breakfast or
it's
like
kind of
as a
like a
dessert?
porridge. Um, no, not really for breakfast, but you can when they make it, they make the pot and everybody's eating it throughout the day.
Mm.
So it's just something like to have that, if you're hungry, you just go and get some, but not really for a specific time of the day.
Mm.
But when it's cold weather, they make it more than in the summer
Okay.
too. Hmm.
So definitely around like the colder winter, like fall, like basically around this time of the year, they're making
Hmm.
it.
Yes.
Perfect. Well, great. Thank you so much for sharing it. I mean, some of these other, the name of the dishes, will there be a way that we can look these up, Karina? Can you just share with
Um,
me some of the names at the end? Did like shoot me over an email?
okay. So I just call them, the way that my mom
Yeah.
does. But yeah, I can shoot you an email on that, and so you can have it.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of them I've actually been able to find already and look up. So,
Oh, good.
oh yeah.
Good.
Like the food blogger world is huge. We are
Mhm.
always putting out recipes and
Yeah.
sharing, so there may
So
be several names for one dish.
one of the things that I come to realize is the way that my mom makes a cabrito with the flour, like a gravy. She
Mhm.
also made a lot of the things that way. Chicken, pork, and I think sometimes they did it that way too to make more, back
Mhm.
especially back then. But that's one of our favorite ways to eat it.
Yeah.
I'm
Well,
hungry now. I
I'm
am.
so well, I don't want to keep you guys starving talking about food any longer.
Mhm.
But this has been such a treat, so fun, and I really appreciate everyone being in attendance. Oh, did we get what's the best time of the year to visit El Nacimiento? I guess this is for Karina because you help with the festival. You've been a part of that celebration for years, and I know Maria, you've visited many times too.
Yeah, so El Nacimiento is a very small, it's a small community, and everybody works there. The women, everybody has something to do. So a lot of times people think that they can just drive out there and somebody's gonna, you can just visit. But maybe it was like that at one time, but it's not that way anymore. So I think that Juneteenth celebration would be the best time, and our Juneteenth in Mexico is on the 19th. Even
Mhm.
if it's Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday, it doesn't matter whenever the 19th falls,
Yeah.
that's when we have it. So I think Juneteenth, it's one of the best times to go visit. Mhm.
Yeah.
Mm.
And that seems like a good time for just weather-wise too. It's gonna be warm and comfortable, so.
Well, it is very
It is very hot.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, thank you for this insight. Yeah, well, that is all the questions I see so far. But yes, for anyone who's interested in learning, oh, let me add, where can people find out more about you, Karina, your nonprofit, your organization, and the work that you do?
So I am the treasurer at the Seminole Cemetery Association out of Brackettville, Texas. And we do our Seminole Day celebration there.
Mhm.
We also have a Juneteenth celebration, and then I am the founder of. Right now, I still have it under La Casa de Cultura of the Black Seminoles of Nacimiento, Coahuila. But we are transitioning into Asociación Civil in Mexico as a nonprofit, and it is going to be La Casa of the Black Seminole Diaspora of Coahuila, Mexico. So we're still working on that transition.
No,
But you can find them
And
on
absolutely.
then
Facebook too.
Yes.
Facebook, yes,
And is the Facebook, it's Casa de la Couture, is that the same one?
yes, yes, we still have it under Casa de la Cultura.
Okay, perfect. Well, and I have your email contact, so we'll stay in connection. Therefore, if anyone has any questions, I can always refer them your way.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And Maria, I'm sure that everyone wants to keep up with your publications too. So
Anytime.
where can we find more information on the research that you're doing?
So my book is upcoming, in probably in the next year and a half, maybe two, but it will be out. When it's out, I'll let you know.
Yes, please. I want a signed copy. We want
Okay,
them
I
we
will
want to read
get
them
you a
first.
signed copy.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Lace, so much for your time. You've been truly generous, and we're just so excited that we were able to make this connection and celebrate our Hispanic Heritage Month together, talk about the program, talk about food, nutrition, history. These are the conversations that matter at the end of the day, and your time has been very valuable for us. So I'm so grateful. Thank you again.
Thank
And
you,
Thank you.
sir, for having
It was
absolutely.
a pleasure. Thank you. And it was a pleasure to present with Corina too, so
Oh, thank you for helping.
I did not help.
And thank you everyone for joining. So I know it's getting late. Have dinner, be well. Happy Hispanic Heritage Month, and I appreciate it all. Have a good rest of your night. I'll be logging out. Take
You
care.
too.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank